right, well, I'm excited to talk to you all about how to build an infinite content machine. So basically, what I'm going to be talking about today is not about strategy or how to do keyword research or anything, but how to scale content and multimedia production for B2B SaaS. First things first, who am I? So I've worked in content marketing for over a decade and have watched the profession grow from its humble beginnings where, you know, most companies were kind of iffy about it or thought it was just blogging and wasn't really tied to any real business goals, to becoming one of the most critical components of every business's success today. Currently, I am the director of content marketing at Hopin. For those who don't know, Hopin is an event management platform for hybrid, in-person, and virtual events. Previously, I've worked at Udemy and Eventbrite, and I've advised startups Series A, Series B, like Dovetail, Obviously AI, and more. So today we're going to talk about one thing, which is content marketing is effing hard right now. So what do I mean by that? So back in the day, let's say even 2016, I used to be able to publish a blog post on a Tuesday and then come back to work the next morning on Wednesday morning and see it ranking at the top of search results. Used to be able to back then call something an ultimate guide and it would become a lead magnet, no matter how crappy the piece of content was. And then you were also able back then to create a library of keyword focused how-to content and just see that translate into millions of dollars in revenue. Well, those days are over. It's nothing like that today. In fact, today, 65% of Google searches result in zero click. The amount of people that you will reach on Facebook with your branded posts, you will only reach 0.08% of followers. And 85% of content receives less than 10 shares. Basically, today, if you want to be successful in content marketing, you have to create a lot of content. And like I said, content marketing has gone from this kind of like, not too sure thing in business to a thing that everyone is depending on. So there's a lot of pressure on teams to really perform in this climate. And so people are looking towards you as content marketers to create a lot of content in various formats and types. So not just written blog posts and gated ebooks, but also video and audio content. You're being asked to support multiple teams. You need to help sales with their sales enablement content. You need to help events with their events. You need to help product marketing with their content, customer marketing. You then have to feed all the different distribution and promotion channels, email nurtures, campaign emails, promotional channels, all the ads that promote your content. And then you need to create content today that engages people on platform and in feed. And then if you're a global company and you have to address the needs of different regions, you need to have content that is translated and localized for that region. And that means not just throwing things in Google Translate or even just hiring a translator. You need regionally, local, specific examples in language to make sure that that content resonates. There's just a lot that you have to do. So how do you do all of that? Seems like a lot. And one of the old ways of doing content is just one at a time approach. And it's wholly inadequate. Typo there, I'm just realizing. You cannot, be able to produce a lot of content this way. It just is impossible. You'll need to hire a lot of people and spend an exponential amount of money to scale. Now, approach a lot of people are used to these days. It's been around since HubSpot and Marketo and other people like Post made popular back in the day, is what's called like content pillar approach. You produce a really big piece of content like a book or a guide, and then you're able to have all the articles pulled out from it. And this is a really good way to scale, but it actually, you'll hit a roadblock, or you'll hit a wall essentially at a certain point. But if you're doing this, you're headed in the right direction. The best way to scale content production is modular content creation and atomization. This approach basically sees content as little pieces of content that can be broken up into pieces and turned into all of the types of content you see here to feed all of these different channels, content types, platform agnostic content. Basically, modular content is content that can be atomized into smaller pieces of content that can be effortlessly repurposed, remixed, and refreshed. This will allow you to produce and publish derivative content. So back in that example of an ebook turning into multiple articles, that's derivative content. You can even take an ebook and turn it into a tip sheet or a checklist. Modular content makes it easy to support your teams that are helping with distribution and promotion. Instead of them needing to figure out how to write an email to support your, a piece of content that you just launched, you would be able to quickly turn a piece of content into the necessary pieces, like an executive summary of an ebook that has the why you should read this and what you'll learn. Is perfect copy for landing pages, for your campaign emails, or nurture drips. Modular content also allows you to cross-cut and rearrange to form new pieces. So when you have a lot of people, when they think about keyword research and writing content for SEO, they think, here's a keyword, I wrote a post about it. But you can take that same idea of a keyword and you can write about 10, 20 different pieces of content on one keyword. And the way to do that is to write one piece and then think of what's a different angle. Because when you think of a modular content, you're like, well, what if I actually focus on this part of the problem and not the whole problem? This will make a lot more sense in a little bit when I show you some examples. The other thing is it allows you to refresh SEO and evergreen educational content. So a little bit deeper into repurposing. Let's imagine you have a research report that you spent a lot of money on. You did a survey, you surveyed thousands of people, and you got all this data. It's your annual tentpole survey research that you publish every year. When you publish that report, you can actually turn that into the fodder for a live stream / webinar where everyone who is an expert in that field or some customers, you get them together to talk about that data. Same applies to an event. You take the report and you use that as the discussion material for the event. What are the pain points that people are feeling? You can then create an entire agenda based on what you've learned from that report. You can take the data visualizations of the report and you can turn that into an infographic. And then, of course, you can take all the trends. You can create a too long didn't read summary article. You can take each trend and deep dive into the trend in an article. You can then create an entire tip sheet or checklist or how-to articles that help people execute on what's the insights from the report. Remix. So with Remix, this one's a lot of fun. This is when you take, say, an ebook, and you take that ebook. It's a lot of work. You've done a ton of research. There's even like pages of materials and resources that never made the actual final piece. You can use all of that material to create an entire course or certification program. You can then use that course and certification program, the slides that you create for that, you can turn that into a slide deck that turns into a LinkedIn short cast. Again, the chapters of the book can turn into articles, which then can turn into a short form LinkedIn post. You can also take, say, a long form piece of content like an ebook, and you can turn it into a sort of a checklist. So that's more tactical, because for me, like a book or a long form guide is both conceptual, strategic, and tactical. But if you need someone like to take action on those pieces of that insight and those strategies, a template is perfect. And then you can use that template to throw into a customer newsletter. You can turn a book into guides, which you then turn into a Twitter thread, which I know Amanda's a huge fan of. You can take all of the terms and things that you define in that book and create an encyclopedia and glossary. You can then use the pieces of the book, like the intro and the executive summary, to create the material for a campaign email, then reword and rearrange that content for new angles for a nurture email, a trigger email, and then of course summarize it into a customer newsletter. Repurpose and remix. So this also applies to non-written content. So let's say you do a live stream or webinar. You take that live stream and webinar like this, and you can take the recording, atomize that into a podcast. That podcast then gets repurposed into the article. Say it's a roundup of all of the takeaways from the live stream, which can then turn into a Twitter thread. Maybe the podcast is a story. Maybe instead of us going through these technical how-to educational stuff, Mark is continuing to talk to me about my film background instead. And so you get to learn who Ronnie is and who he was growing up. That turns into a story. And then one of the things you see if you're on LinkedIn, you see people like Chris Walker, they do a really amazing job at taking content from their live stream podcasts in little clips. And you can take those video clips and turn those into Instagram stories, LinkedIn posts. And then of course you can turn all of this into how-to guides, which then go into a subscription newsletter and so forth. And then refresh. So it's a new year. There's a lot of people out there who might have written the 2021 guide to XYZ. You have this guy that has an old date on it. If you're in the United States and went to college, you're familiar with how textbooks in the US have, and maybe even globally, I don't know, basically slap a new year and call it the like 2022 edition of that book, and you go into it and your professor said, yeah, this is pretty much the same book as last year. They just rearranged the chapters and updated some of the stats. You can do that too. So you can take your 2021 guide that you published in January 2021, and you could take the report, the articles, the templates, the guides, the stories, and the events content that you had produced and published throughout the year to refresh and update the ebook that you published last year. Basically, with modular content, there's infinite possibilities. When you approach content purposefully to be repurposed, that long form guide, as I said, turns into a series of how-to tutorials. The series of how-to tutorials can be compiled into a long form guide or ebook. The intro or executive summary for the long form guide can be a landing page copy, the email copy. A how-to tutorial guide can be summarized into a Twitter thread. A long form guide can be reimagined as a workbook or checklist. A long form guide can be summarized into a summary video. This is really important if you want to get some of that YouTube SEO. A live stream of data visualizations from a research report can be turned into an infographic. A live stream webinar can be repurposed into a podcast, like I said. Clips can be turned into promotion. Also, the other thing that is really important is, say, that research report or a long form guide can be an anchor for an event. And then you can also take something like the executive summary for a long form guide and make that part of a sales cadence. One of the things we did at Udemy was all the materials that went into the research of, say, an ebook or a long form guide. After publishing that ebook or guide, my team would always go and clean up all of their research and turn it into a facilitation for a book club for sales and CS. So that when customers ask them, hey, how do I solve this problem? They were able to have a discussion like an expert and not sort of regurgitate high level talking points. So basically, this is one of the most important ways that you can create not just enough content to be publishing out there to the public, but support your internal teams. So this is where I'll end before we go into the Q&A, but I wanted to get into the practicalities of how to start with this. When you approach your content, first identify the raw sources of material. This is your data, your stories, your interview, your quotes, and develop a system for processing these. Every time you interview someone, whether it's just an interview that'll never see the light of day or an interview for a podcast, develop a folder and file naming system and or basically like a spreadsheet or Airtable base and to organize all of that content so that when someone is creating a piece of content further down the line, they can easily go and find a quote that supports their points in their content. Second is transform your content calendar into a searchable content repository. This will supercharge your internal linking, but it will also help you manage the large library of content. This is why, and I mean, if you're using Asana, cool. But one of the reasons I don't like Asana is when a project or a task is over, you see the little unicorns in that piece of content and all the data that was with it goes away. I need that stuff to continue living on. So later I can go quickly know what pieces of content we published in the past, when was it published, when was it refreshed, when was it updated, what keywords were associated with it. And it also makes it easier to measure performance later. The other thing is bake distribution and promotion into production. So require content creators and managers to provide the bite-sized copy needs. In our briefs here at Hopin, when you write a long form piece of content, we have a little area where we ask you to create the 2 options for social copy and 1 Twitter thread. It's just there. And we teach them to just, it's not like that to create something new. They're literally just copy and pasting stuff from the actual content, tweaking it a little bit to be standalone. The second to last is create a library of briefs, outline templates with specifications for each content type. So in order for people to quickly write content and think in a modular mindset, you create templates so that when you have a how-to, you have this how-to brief template that you then create, you have the outline, and everyone is just used to this is a how-to. It has a logical flow that goes a certain way. It has these components. When you create a long form topic guide, it has all of these sections and modules that are in there that they need to know and identify. And then the last part is, especially as you have, if you're working for a content team that is growing and has a large, expansive marketing team and sales org, you need to develop a unified content strategy with your cross-functional teams to decentralize content creation and ensure high quality content is produced efficiently. This means your product marketing team, empower them to create content, even if it's the first drafts, empower them to create the battle cards and everything for your sales team based on all of the stuff that you've created. And when you have a unified strategy, think about how when you're planning for the quarter, you gather inputs at the beginning of the quarter, you ask everyone, who are we trying to target? What products are in on the roadmap that we need to start seeding keywords for? All of the things you need so that when you're in a creation sprint in between quarters, no one's bothering you with like, hey, we need a post, or hey, we need this thing. It gives them an opportunity to be bought in and understand how your team works. So that way you're not just producing content in a silo, but producing content that will then be used in all the different ways that I just walked you through. And with that.
All right, Ronnie, that was great. I have a lot of questions here, and not because you haven't covered the topic, but because it's such a good topic that so few people seem to talk about. All right, let's start with Mika. So what are your suggestions for organizing and managing all of the content you produce? Now, you talked a little bit about Airtable, but whatever really, platform agnostic, but can you give us like a little bit of insight into how that works practically? Like, what does that mean?
2 key things are, first, developing a robust taxonomy for all of your different things. So like ICPs, content types. So at Hopin, there's a very huge distinct difference between a guide and a tutorial. A guide is very extensive, goes deep into a topic. A tutorial is something that goes right, you should be able to go into it and solve a job to be done right away. And so this taxonomy helps us as a team, but also cross-functionally be able to talk about content and understand what all those different pieces are. The second thing is editorial metadata. So being able to go into whether it's Airtable or wherever it is, and being able to like slice and dice your content by what are the parent topics, what are the intended audience. Every piece of content has an awareness level. So we, instead of doing top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, we focus on awareness level of unaware of the product, problem aware, solution aware, product aware. And so if it's product aware, it means they're further down the funnel, and it's really about the product and trying to pitch the product. So we know we can base performance based on the funnel that way. And then other editorial metadata you can then slice and dice is, what is the length of the content, how many words, what is the every piece of content we have has a reading level grade tied to it. There's like so many other pieces of editorial metadata that you can add to a piece of content that I could probably do a whole masterclass on editorial metadata. But the idea is that it's all the fields essentially that you can associate with a piece of content and creating a relational database between that and your keywords and all your other stuff. So you can organize and connect it to your performance, and then say, when you do an audit every year, you can really dive into your content and make really great informed data-driven decisions about how to improve your entire strategy.
I worked with, at the start of last year, an editorial team that I really thought were like super pro, and their editorial planning documents all had business impact scores for every article or every piece that they wanted to create as well, which I thought was interesting. I'd never seen that before on a content marketing planning document. Usually it's like, hey, how much like keyword volume do we get for this and stuff like that. But I think that's especially relevant when it comes to thinking about how you're going to atomize this content. So how you're going to repurpose like a big piece, for example. It's important to be able to say it's not just about keywords anymore. It's also about relevance. It's also about how easy this is to consume, like how good a fit is it for the platform that I'm making this thing for, all of that kind of stuff.
A little bit on that real quick is it's not there to organize, but a key component of our editorial process is we have quality rubrics. So every time a piece of content comes in at first draft, we have a rubric where we score the different criteria of content to know where's the quality. This has two purposes. The first is it helps us identify where content creators need to hone in and be developed, but it also allows us to understand and improve and sort of move the needle on the quality. Because I have, my team can chime in here if they're on here, but I have this mindset of progress over perfection. I can hold up entire production cycle of content because I'm like, oh, it's not the right quality. But if I can see the quality is improving over time, it's like, I will be happy.
That's such a good tip, that rubric. And it's one that you barely ever hear anyone mention. So totally valuable. Brandy asked, how do we do all this with a small marketing team? Actually, a couple of people asked a similar thing. So thinking like, let's say you've got a marketing team of like, oh gosh, maybe I'm giving away the wrong numbers here, but like 5 or fewer people. Where can someone start with that?
So first off, you need to identify the pieces of content that develop the raw sources of material. So like research reports are heavy, they end up you getting a lot of information there. You can then take, say, a podcast. A lot of times people look at podcasts and they're like, what's the ROI? And I'm like, your podcast can have 0 listeners as long as the material from it is translating into content that is you cannot copy, that your competitors cannot like turn over. So first off, identifying the few pieces that you need in order for your team to be seen as successful. The other thing I'll say is at Eventbrite, there were 3 content marketers, and each quarter we were producing 9 ebooks. I want to say 9 tip sheets or workbooks, and about 60 to 70 blog posts in one quarter. And it's all because of this atomization. And it's
Actually,
all
tired
because we
just
started.
listening to that, Ronnie.
It was a lot. And I mean, honestly, I don't think we needed that much, but it wasn't my call at first. I started at Eventbrite as a content marketing manager who helped build the engine. It wasn't until 2019 that I took the reins and scaled it globally. But at the time, that was what we were producing. And it's possible to do it with a few people. You just need to basically think not as like a publisher where you're like, oh, I just got pieces publishing. Everything that I just walked you through is essentially supply chain management. Think about how to produce a lot of content. Where are the places that you can like put a lot of time and then effortlessly turn that into a lot of other pieces of content? That's my key advice for a small team.
I actually started out my career in journalism magazines, and that was in like 2010 when journalism suddenly went from like the budgets are okay to like, oh my gosh, we have no money, like everyone has to do everything now. And suddenly everyone was like, okay, how can we make one piece of content and squeeze all of the juice out of it? And so like newsrooms have always been kind of, you know, you're talking there about kind of coming up with different ideas. Like I think the analogy between or the kind of parallel between the newsroom and what is now like a content marketing newsroom basically is pretty strong. You're all gathered around a table basically just coming up with ideas based on single sentences, sometimes in a piece of copy, or like one stat, and you're taking that and turning it into like 10 different ideas. Hey, we could create a slideshow for this platform, or we could turn this into a webinar topic and stuff like that. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah. So another answer on that is, I don't remember the dates or whatever, but I decided out of keyword research once at Eventbrite to do a ebook on event sponsorship. It was one of my like, it might work, not work, risky kind of plays. And it turned into a huge lead magnet. Within not the next quarter, but the quarter after, my boss comes to me and says, I want you to do another event sponsorship piece. And I'm like, but I just, they're okay, sure. And so with that one, I went really deep into the more tactical instead of just talking about the state of sponsorship. And I thought, great, I now have 2 pieces, it's all over. Within another couple of quarters, I was asked to do another one. And I said, can I just refresh the first one I did? And the answer was yes, but you still have to do another. With that one, I was like, well, what do? I've literally exhausted the topic. And then I realized I hadn't done the angle of like when things go foobar. Like, what are all the ways that, like, what's the negative angle of it? So it's like, not just like when I go back to that idea of like tackling a keyword multiple times, really think about what are all the different ways I can talk about this? What are all the pain points? What are all the ways that things can go right, wrong? All of those, there's like a million ways to talk about the same topic over and over again. And so don't hold yourself back on that.
Yeah. Okay, that feels like a good moment. Amanda, she's getting so many mentions on this. She asked, how do you think about the order in which content's created? As in, do you create modular content first, then build an ebook based on that? Or do you build the big content like an ebook first and then chop it up? Curious if you found one approach more sustainable than the other.
So it depends on what's happening in your world. If, say, you are just starting at a company as the content lead, and you have to start pumping out content and starting to rank, and all of the eyes are like, we want to see 3 posts a week. But you know that those bigger pieces are going to be the things that drive demand, that people talk about, that are easier for, say, sales and CS to share with their clients or their prospects. You might want to start with the articles and turn the small pieces into big pieces. But if you have like a library of content already, and you can actually focus on the big pieces because the big pieces take longer to produce, start with the big pieces. If you want to really differentiate your content and you don't have the buy-in to do a podcast like that, that might be your best bet, because if you end up with a repository of examples to pull from customers, that whole voice of the customer becomes really easy. And you can start just basically say to CS, can I have a conversation with a customer once a week? And you build that up and you do little mini stories that then you can put into your big pieces of content last. So it depends on like really what your mandate is or what the business is looking for, plus also what the goals are. But for me, when you think of a modular piece, like a modular content creation, it really is like possible to go from big to small, small to big, medium to small or large. So I guess I'm not exactly answering Amanda's question the right way, but I think best way is just to focus on like getting a lot of content out, and always, no matter whether you're looking at small pieces or big pieces, that you approach content knowing it's going to turn into other pieces of content.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll always get you to where, if say you started with the big pieces and everyone's like, why haven't you been publishing? You can then quickly pivot and start chopping that stuff up, or quickly go change your strategy. If say your content calendar months ahead, you're planning all these long form topic guides and ebooks, and your management comes and says, we need to be publishing more blog posts, you don't have to redo your calendar. Instead of doing the big pieces, you then break up the pieces. And the way you do that is you think of your topic research or your keyword research. If you're going to do a piece on event sponsorship, what's underneath there, all those subtopics are then your smaller pieces of content. So instead of waiting to publish the big book, you publish the pieces that will become the chapters and then compile it into that book or topic guide.
I guess like, you talk about kind of atomization. At the end of the day, like when you think about the original analogy there about what is an atom, like, you can put all sorts of different atoms together, right? I'm not a scientist, but it feels like that's the right thing to say. They become different things, right? So like, you put a whole bunch of hydrogen and oxygen together and you get water. It's as simple as that, guys. We'll just create more water. But in content, it's probably a bit more straightforward than elemental chemistry, I suppose. Can we talk a little bit about your management, right? So you mentioned briefly management a couple of times, actually. This is, for many people, a new approach to content. Like, it's changing the way that we think about planning content, certainly. Excuse me. Now, how do you get buy-in from your executive team for a strategy like this?
I've been lucky to have it easy. And by easy is, before Eventbrite, it was hard because content was not really like, people were kind of like unsure about it. It seemed like a bunch of creatives wanted to like just write stuff. But when I started at Eventbrite, my manager at the time, Micah Hirschman, who's now the VP of marketing at Envoy, he was 100% bought into content and had hired Margaret Jones who had come from Marketo, and where I had learned literally everything about content marketing before working for her. So I've had buy-in like
Hmm.
there at Udemy, and I made sure I had buy-in before I accepted the offer at Hopin. But the long story short is you need to be able to figure out how content supports the business. Content is not just content for content's sake. You need to explicitly tie it to how are you helping people understand that your company exists as a business that has a solution for them, and is not just has the solution but is the best solution. So if I had to say like how to get buy-in, first figure out how to tie your content to revenue. See if there's like data to support that. If you don't have that, say you're a small company, you don't have marketing automation, understand the KPIs and all the conversion points. So how does traffic turn into a lead? Like, are you generating leads? Are you generating business? If you're a D2C business or somebody who doesn't gate content or have a sales team, are you driving signups? Are you driving first, activations of the product and stuff like that? Help work with your product and your data team to figure out those things. The first thing I would also say is when you do your keyword research, start at the bottom. Figure out all the keywords that are related to all of your features in your product and start there and build up. Because if you're having trouble getting buy-in, don't want to waste time at the top of the funnel just yet. You want to be able to empower sales or the people who are measuring your self sign-on business. So which is like free trials and so forth. You want to be able to prove that you're just bringing people to the business and helping them understand the product, and then build up from there.
Yes, you're speaking my language. I literally got a fake tattoo that said target customer pain points. I'm putting an article here in the chat about how to do that specifically. But we're talking about content here. We're talking about a little bit about kind of measuring ROI. One tip, this is a very tactical thing, but one thing that I don't see everybody doing is looking at different attribution models. So a lot of people, especially who aren't in marketing, but are in the analytics for some reason, will look at what's the source of the conversion, right? So they'll go, hey, what's like they'll type in content into the little search box where it says source medium or, whatever, organic or direct even. And they'll go, how many like sign up events or how many activation events did that give us? The problem with that is that you end up just looking at the last click, I believe, the last click attribution. So like who you don't see what happened the whole journey before somebody eventually decided to convert, right? Now, we know from like any one of us in this conversation can look at our analytics data and we can probably say, actually, not people don't just look at an article and convert immediately. Like they look at many things, they experience your brand from different perspectives, and then suddenly they're like, hey, I'm ready to buy, right? So definitely use the kind of an attribution model where maybe you look at first and last touch attribution. You can even look at it in a different way. I found first and last touch to be pretty good and really show where the thing is. On that note though, Ronnie, one question that I had was, let's say we're talking about creating stuff for like social media or we're building events and things like that. How do you think about attribution of content for this model?
So first, when you get into like the dark funnel, I almost feel like it shouldn't be called the dark funnel, but it's a mixture of signals. So for social, you want to look at like what is the engagement and impressions. You want to there's like a lot of different tactics here that are like not proven yet, but like being able to like measure share of voice, being able to like look and find out, oh, so if your team is honed in on a specific topic for a week or a month, you want to start looking at, did the share of voice work, like tools like BuzzSumo and so forth, to be able to help you. Did people start talking about that more? Did you see other articles starting to be published like that? Did other people sort of reciprocate that sort of like message that you were sending in your content? Something that I like to call gong stalking is, if you have gong, see if you can get a seat and use the keywords. I forget what it's called because I haven't been in it since like beginning of December, but basically you can go in there and you can look at, are people talking about the topic that you're publishing on? And then it all then goes back into, did you see like that tying that engagement to some of the patterns that you're seeing in your quantitative data? So it's the same idea that people would do to measure out of home campaigns. When we put this billboard somewhere, we started to see an uptick in sales in the grocery store. That's same model applies when you're trying to do the dark funnel, is looking for patterns. At Eventbrite, what we would do is we had a brand index through YouGov, and we'd see when people started to say, yeah, we actually recognize that we recognize Eventbrite, and we would see upticks in that depending on our publishing cadence and how much we were publishing.
Yeah.
So like lots of like those like correlations, but not causations, that give you some sense there.
Yeah, I think it's a developing science, isn't it? With especially with like content marketing, and there's the kind of classic admin attribution that you could do with just hiring like the market research firm to work it out for you, or like you can kind of take some basic metrics, right, and say like, are we getting more customers? And if we're getting more customers, did we raise spend anywhere else that we can attribute that to, that we can maybe attribute that more directly to? And if not, maybe that's a pretty good indicator. We've got a couple
like referral traffic too. Like if you start to see more referral traffic, like even if it's like inferred, and you start to see like it's not like a direct correlation, say like just social or some other site, you'll start to see some stuff.
Yeah.
What are you gonna say?
There's a good couple, aren't there? I think we've got a couple more minutes here. So I just want to get to one or two more of the questions that are in the chat. Anonymous attendee has asked, when creating technical content, how do you deal with the situation where the approver, who has the technical knowledge, is being swamped with content created by junior members who don't have technical knowledge to approve or review?
Really hard question.
We're testing you, Ronnie.
I know. Well, technical content is hard. So first off, if you can get someone who is the person who's the expert in that content to be writing the content. The other thing is, when you're working with people, say, your CTO or CIO is the expert here for your technical content, and they're busy as all hell. Set up a schedule that that you'll be delivering the piece to them in advance, and let them know, give them the criteria of what to be looking at. The other thing with modular content is, say you wrote a 3,000 word guide on that topic, maybe there are key points that you need to make sure he or she sees, highlight those or break out those chunks to make sure that they are approving those chunks or those pieces, those modules, and that if that's approved, everything else is approved. But the key to me getting subject matter experts to approve things and not hold up our production cycle is to let them know that before they are a subject matter expert, give them the date that they're going to expect their the piece to review, and let them know they have 1 or 2 days after that. And then when you are on top of your content production, you'll know if there's a delay, and you can communicate. And then say like a week or two before that piece is going to come in, maybe even a few days, depending on your production cycle, just keep them in the loop, remind them that that piece is going to be coming and that they have 1-2 days to turn around their feedback.
Yeah, I love it. It's something we see a lot at Powered by Search, kind of getting that kind of approval, particularly when we obviously we work with loads and loads of different kinds of companies. And one just practically there, like Ronnie was saying, one thing that I've seen work well is like kind of like a triple lock of approval. So basically saying like whenever you've assigned a task, like, or you've put something in the editorial calendar, basically saying create an automation maybe that basically adds a to-do item to something that you share if possible. Like if you've got a project management tool that you all use or whatever, adding that in. If you're doing that internally, obviously it's a bit more difficult externally. And then basically adding a, I always shoot a Loom video that says, hey, here's what I want from you. It's 2 minutes, just watch this. And then I add another message that says, okay, here's the thing, here's the Loom video, here's the to-do date, and done. Basically check it off when it's done. I find that works really, really well. It's a pain sometimes to manage, but like it's a bigger pain to miss deadlines. So yeah. And then we have one more question here about how do you handle the content to target personas and verticals? So Hopin's in events, right? Although you can maybe tell me otherwise if it's more broad than that. But you do a guide for example, life sciences events specifically, right? That's from Ivana, by the way. Also, any suggestions to expanding content using outsourcing content companies or freelancers? We'll take that in 2 parts. Let's talk about the personas and how we develop that first.
So depending on your resources, let's say it's just you or a small team. The best way to approach verticals is to focus on your agnostic use cases. Start with your agnostic as your baseline, and then from there, your agnostic content can then be verticalized to tackle all the different verticals. So let's say Hopin's events, there's marketing events, there's recruiting events, there's college educational events that happen on campus. Like there's all kind of different ones. So I would want to start with an agnostic piece about that pain point if it's shared across all of the verticals, and then repurpose that content into the different verticals. And by repurposing, if you're thinking about modules and all the things that I described about modularization of content, is you would take the agnostic piece, and when, say, your chapter is an intro that sets up the why, or the why of the problem, and then the what, and then under that is a like example, you take that example out and you take a vertical example and slot it in. And so it's the same piece of content that just gets sort of judged, and you kind of tweak some of the language to make sure you're speaking to that audience, is the easiest way to tackle verticals.
So smart and so simple, but I wouldn't have thought of it. I would be like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna commit to creating a whole bunch of content. Yeah. And that's why you're the expert here, Ronnie. So practically, Ronnie, I hope you're okay with me doing this. We were looking at the 2022 event trends report the other day. I was so impressed by that. So Hopin have just published a event trends report. And what I love about it is that there's obviously there's an element of research, right? So like what's happening, what's going to happen. But you can take that and you can turn it into like so many different pieces just by thinking about, okay, what does this mean for each sector? And then you can say, okay, well, what formats can we share this in? And then you multiply those two together and you have a huge amount of content, but it's all like based on the same piece. And I know that's kind of the whole topic of this, but when you see an example like that and how fast that can multiply and how much you can squeeze out of the budget that it took to get one piece of content created, that seems so so cool to me.
Agreed. What's
I'm
great about trend stuff too is your product team will love you.
hey,
The more research you do about pain points and everything that's on your customer's mind, and you feed that stuff to your product team, it gives them ideas for what the product roadmap should be.
man. All right, Ronnie, we're at time now. Thank you so much for coming, sharing your insights, your experience with us. I want to say thank you to everyone for showing up. It's always great, and there were so many good questions today. We're going to do another one of these next month. I'll send you details about that as soon as I have them. Pumped to see you then. Take care.
Yeah.